I didn't think a mistake in a hotel booking could feel like the start of something life-changing. But standing in the dimly lit lobby, suitcase in hand, I realized maybe some mistakes were meant to happen. The clerk's eyes flicked nervously between me and the woman in front of me. She looked completely out of place in this chain hotel, elegant, poised, like she belonged in some quiet boutique in Paris, not a fluorescent-lit corridor in downtown Chicago. Mid-40s, if I had to guess, and yet there was a warmth in her eyes that made the edges of my nerves soften. She held herself like someone who had seen too much but hadn't yet learned to hide the sparkle. "They double-booked my room," she said softly, almost apologetically, her voice a mix of fatigue and restrained frustration. Her hand gripped her bag strap a little too tightly, fingers curling like she was holding herself together. That's when I noticed the faint tremor in her knuckles, tiny, human, and utterly disarming. I swallowed, suddenly aware of how young I must have looked to her, how out of place I probably seemed. I can take the other room?" I offered, but she shook her head. "No, it's fine," she said, a half-smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "You take the bed. I'll stay up. Keep you safe." Her words caught me off guard, and not because they sounded like some tired, half-joke gesture of politeness. There was something in her tone, vulnerability wrapped in quiet authority, that made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't felt before. I nodded, trying not to look as flustered as I felt. The hallway smelled faintly of fresh linen and something older, a soft scent of lavender mixed with a trace of perfume that reminded me of libraries and winter afternoons. She moved with slow grace, sliding her keycard into the lock. The click of the door echoed in the narrow corridor, and I felt a strange anticipation, as though the sound itself had been waiting for me. Inside, the room was modest but clean. I set down my bag, avoiding her gaze as she perched on the edge of the bed she claimed. The silence stretched. Not uncomfortable, exactly. More like the calm before a storm you secretly hope will never arrive. I noticed how her hair fell in a soft wave over her shoulder, catching the dim light in a way that made me want to reach out and brush it back. I didn't, of course. I just stared at it, my hands itching for some excuse to do anything. "I usually don't do this," she said quietly, almost to herself. "Stay in a stranger's room, I mean." I caught her gaze this time. Her eyes, warm and dark, held a flicker of nervous humor and something else, something I couldn't name yet, but it made me feel like I'd just been handed a secret too intimate to share aloud. "Neither do I," I admitted, and suddenly the air between us felt heavier, charged, electric. She tilted her head slightly, studying me, her lips parting as if to say something, then closing again. We fell into a silence that spoke louder than words, and I realized I'd never met anyone whose presence could make a hotel room feel like the entire world. The quiet stretched until I heard it, the sharp, insistent ding of the elevator bell outside the door. She glanced at me, and I caught the briefest shadow of a question in her eyes, curiosity, caution, something else entirely. And that was the moment I knew, whatever this was, it had already started. I couldn't stop noticing the little things about her, the way her eyes lingered on objects as if measuring their worth, the faint crease at the corner of her mouth that hinted at years of careful self-restraint. She spoke sparingly, but when she did, it was with precision, like she'd learned long ago that words had weight. "I used to travel a lot for work," she said, tracing her finger along the seam of the bedspread. "Hotels, airports, meetings that never really ended. You get used to being alone, even when people are around." Her voice had that soft, almost musical rhythm, and I realized she wasn't just telling me about her past, she was warning me, quietly, about the walls she'd built. I shifted in my chair, suddenly aware of the age gap between us. Me, barely 22, fumbling through the edges of adulthood. Her, mid-40s, with a life that had seen joy and heartbreak, victories and regrets. She carried a quiet authority I wanted to challenge, to explore, but knew I wasn't allowed to, because some lines felt unspoken, unapproachable. I thought about my own past, the awkward relationships, the mistakes that had left me self-conscious and hesitant. I never imagined being in a room like this with someone who made me feel both small and strangely significant at the same time. The pull toward her wasn't just attraction, it was the magnetic weight of curiosity, of wanting to know the story behind those eyes, that guarded smile. She glanced at me, and I felt a flutter in my chest that I tried to hide. "Do you travel a lot?" she asked. There was a softness in her question, but also a subtle edge, as if she was testing boundaries without saying it outright. "Not really," I admitted. "I've mostly stayed in the same city. College, part-time jobs, nothing glamorous." I tried to keep my tone casual, but the truth was that I wanted her to see me, all of me, the awkwardness, the uncertainty, the longing I couldn't name. Her lips curved slightly. "You look different from the usual guests." There was a pause, a weight behind the words. And then, almost imperceptibly, she leaned closer, her hand brushing against mine as she adjusted her bag on the bed. It wasn't intentional, I could tell that, but the touch lingered longer than it should have, and the air between us shifted. For a moment, the hotel room disappeared. I imagined the years she had carried behind her, the loneliness, the careful distance she maintained from people who might leave or disappoint. And then I thought of my own life, scattered and uncertain, and I realized that maybe, for just tonight, either of us needed to hold back. Her eyes met mine, and in that glance, I saw recognition, not of age, not of caution, not even of propriety, but of something more fragile, a shared acknowledgement that we were two people standing on the edge of something neither of us fully understood, yet neither could deny. I wanted to speak, to say something that would erase the invisible rules between us, but my throat tightened. Instead, I just let my fingers hover near hers, a silent invitation. And when she didn't pull away, the tension in the room stretched into something neither of us could ignore. Outside, the hum of the air conditioner filled the silence, but inside, the world had narrowed down to a single, unspoken question: how far would we dare to go? I barely noticed the minutes passing. Every glance, every shift in her posture, felt magnified in the quiet hotel room. My heart raced with a mix of anticipation and fear that I was crossing some invisible line I'd never been warned about. She stood up to stretch, the movement slow and deliberate, and I caught the faint scent of her perfume, a subtle, almost powdery aroma that wrapped around me like a memory I hadn't lived yet. I wanted to reach out, to brush a stray hair from her cheek, but I stayed frozen, my hands tight on the edge of the bed. "You shouldn't be here," she murmured, more to herself than to me. Her eyes flicked to mine, and I felt the weight of unspoken rules pressing down. Age. Experience. Life lived in ways I hadn't yet touched. And yet, the way she looked at me made it impossible to move, impossible to speak. Just as I leaned forward, maybe to say something, maybe to close the distance, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. The sound shattered the bubble around us. She glanced at it, then quickly tucked it away, a flicker of something unreadable in her expression. I knew instinctively, someone knew she was here. Someone who would judge, scold, or worse. "Everything okay?" I asked, my voice uneven. She hesitated, then smiled faintly, a mask over whatever worry had just flickered across her features. "Yeah. Just work stuff." But her hand lingered over the phone longer than necessary, a silent warning. The tension didn't ease. If anything, it tightened. I could feel it in my chest, a pulse that matched hers in ways I didn't understand. I wanted to reach out again, and this time, she didn't move away. Our hands brushed. Just a second, just the tips of fingers, but it was enough. Enough to make my stomach flip, enough to make her inhale sharply. "I maybe should give you space," I said, trying to sound casual. My voice betrayed me, wobbling at the edges. "Maybe," she agreed, but her eyes lingered on mine far longer than they should have. The word felt hollow. Her lips parted as if she wanted to say something more, but the phone buzzed again, this time with a louder, insistent tone. I could see the conflict in her eyes, desire warring with restraint. Guilt mingled with longing. And in that instant, I realized that whatever was happening between us wasn't just attraction, it was dangerous, thrilling, and entirely forbidden. I swallowed. I shouldn't, I said, more to myself than her, though my gaze never left hers. She moved closer, almost imperceptibly, until our shoulders brushed. The proximity was electric. My pulse pounded so loud I thought she might hear it. I needed, to close the last inch between us, but some part of me held back, terrified of the consequences, terrified of ruining the fragile connection we were building. And then the door swung open. A shadow fell across the room, someone neither of us expected, someone whose presence could shatter everything. We froze. Our hands still hovered dangerously close, inches apart, and I could feel her hesitation matching mine. Whatever was about to happen, we both knew it could change everything. The shadow in the doorway didn't move for a long, unbearable second. My chest felt like it had been compressed in a vice. Her eyes widened, not at me, but at him. I couldn't make out the words, couldn't even think straight. All I knew was the sharp, nauseating spike of fear, the sudden awareness that what we'd been dancing around could crumble in an instant. He was her husband, or someone close, someone I couldn't quite name, and suddenly, everything fragile between us felt like it was dangling over a cliff. I wanted to step forward, to explain, to claim what was unspoken between us, but my legs refused to obey. She swallowed, and her lips pressed together in a thin line. Her hand, still brushing mine, trembled slightly. For a fleeting moment I saw the real her, conflicted, human, vulnerable, and my pulse jumped in a way that left me dizzy. "Don't," she whispered, the word barely audible. But it hit me like a hammer. "Don't what? Move? Speak? Touch?" I wasn't sure, and neither was she, and the ambiguity made everything worse. Then, impossibly, I caught a glance of something else, an undercurrent in her expression I hadn't seen before. Was it guilt? Desire? Longing? All of it tangled up in a way that made me ache. My hand twitched. I wanted to close the distance, to finally bridge the space between us, but the presence in the doorway froze me in place. I felt an unexpected surge of jealousy, sharp and unwanted. Not at the man, but at the fact that anyone could come between this strange, fragile bond we were forming. I wanted to roar, to claim her attention, even if it made everything worse. She moved slightly closer to me, her knee brushing mine under the bedspread. The small, accidental contact sent a jolt through my body, and I realized how desperately I wanted her, not just her body, but her trust, her attention, the unspoken acknowledgement that we'd crossed some invisible line. "I can't," she murmured, and the words cut through the tension like a knife. Her eyes flicked toward the doorway, then back to mine. There was fear there, yes, but also something raw, something urgent. She was wrestling with herself in a way I couldn't fully understand, but I could feel it. My heart thundered in my chest. I wanted to tell her she didn't have to fight, that she could let herself lean into this moment, but all my words dissolved into a helpless lump in my throat. The air between us was electric, charged with all the things we couldn't say aloud. And then it happened. She leaned just slightly closer, enough that I could feel the heat of her breath, enough that my resolve shattered completely. My hand hovered, trembling, above hers. Our faces were inches apart. My mind screamed to stop, but my heart was deaf to reason. The doorbell rang, sharp, sudden, impossible to ignore. We both froze, breaths caught, eyes locked. The moment we'd been circling, holding back, teetering on the edge, hung there, suspended, broken by reality. I could feel it in her gaze, the question, the hesitation, the unspoken. "Do we dare?" And then silence, thick and suffocating, waiting for an answer either of us was ready to give. The doorbell hadn't been for us. That much I realized the moment her phone buzzed again. A message this time, not a call. Her eyes widened as she read it, and the flicker of control she'd maintained vanished like smoke. I have to deal with this, she whispered, but the tone wasn't just urgency, it was fear. Something had shifted. The careful composure she wore like armor cracked, revealing the raw vulnerability underneath. I wanted to reach for her, to tell her it was okay, but I froze, unsure if I had any right to interfere. "What is it?" I asked, my voice low. She hesitated, swallowed hard, then met my gaze. "It's someone saw us. Someone knows I'm here." The words hit me like ice water. I felt my stomach twist, my chest tightening. Not just because of the danger, but because the fragile connection we'd been building was suddenly exposed, and everything teetered on the edge. "They who?" I pressed, desperate for details, desperate to understand how safe or doomed we really were. She shook her head, her hand brushing against mine, a fleeting, comforting touch, and I felt it ignite a pulse in my veins. "I can't say. Not yet." Her eyes darted to the door, then back to me, a storm of emotion behind them. "But they think things about me. Things that aren't true." I wanted to argue, to tell her I didn't care what anyone thought, that none of it mattered, but I couldn't. Life, consequences, experience, they were all stacked against me. And yet, in that moment, I realized I didn't want to step away. I wanted to stand beside her, even if it meant risking everything. Her lips parted, then closed again. She ran a hand through her hair, a gesture so human it left me breathless. "I thought I could control it, keep it, just us, just for tonight." I nodded slowly, understanding the weight of her words. Control. Freedom. Desire. All tangled into one impossible knot. My own hands ached to bridge the space between us, to ground her, to show her she wasn't alone in this chaos. Then the twist came, not from words, not from the phone, but from me. A truth I'd been avoiding, buried beneath my own uncertainty. I couldn't stay silent. "I don't care who knows," I blurted, voice sharp in the quiet room. "I don't care what anyone thinks. I want this. I want you." Her eyes widened, glistening with something I couldn't name. Relief? Shock? Fear? All of it. She looked as though I'd thrown a spark into dry tinder. And maybe I had. The tension broke in a heartbeat. She reached for me, hesitated, and then her hand covered mine fully. The contact was electric, grounding, terrifying. But just as the world seemed to shrink to the space between our hands, her phone buzzed again. And this time, the message wasn't just about exposure. It was a warning. A decision had been made on her behalf, something that could undo everything we'd carefully circled around all night. She read it, lips pressed tight, then glanced at me. Her gaze carried the weight of every unspoken rule we'd been breaking, every boundary we'd been testing. And in that look, I realized, nothing was safe anymore. Not her, not me, not this fragile thread connecting us. I reached for her, knowing that whatever happened next could either destroy us, or finally pull us together. The hotel room felt impossibly small. Every glance, every breath, every heartbeat was amplified between us. I could feel her tension like a live wire, a mix of fear, longing, and uncertainty that mirrored my own. The night had stretched us both thin, pushed us closer than either of us had expected. "I can't keep doing this," she whispered, voice trembling. Her hand clutched mine, but it wasn't enough to steady the storm in her eyes. "It's reckless, dangerous. People, responsibilities, they'll..." She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. I cupped her face, ignoring the rational part of my brain that screamed caution. "I don't care," I said, low and urgent. "I don't care about the rules, the age gap, any of it. I care about you." About this, us. Her breath hitched, a shiver running through her spine. She pressed her forehead to mine, close enough that I could feel the warmth of her skin, the subtle tremor of her hands against mine. You don't even know what you're saying, she murmured, half laughing, half crying, all vulnerability. I do, I insisted. I've never known anything this intense. I can't ignore it. For a moment, we simply stood there, suspended in the gravity of unspoken truths. The world outside the hotel, the judgment, the expectations, the danger, felt distant, irrelevant. All that mattered was the fragile thread we'd been weaving all night. Her lips parted, and I thought she might speak, might pull back, might anything. But instead, she leaned closer. My heart thundered, anticipation and fear tangled in a single pulse. Our foreheads pressed together, breaths mingling, and I realized we were at the edge of everything we'd been dancing around all night. I'm scared, she admitted, a whisper that sounded like a confession to the universe. I don't want to lose myself, or you. I don't want to lose you either, I said, my voice breaking slightly under the weight of honesty. I reached for her hand, holding it firmly, a silent promise. Whatever happens next, we face it together. Her eyes glistened. For the first time, I saw all the walls she'd built crumble, not completely, but enough to let me in. She pressed her hand to my chest, feeling the rapid beat of my heart. You really mean that? Every word, I whispered. And then the knock came, soft, hesitant, demanding attention from the world outside. The reminder that consequences were real, that the night wasn't ours alone. She glanced at the door, then back at me, the tiniest smile tugging at her lips. We will figure it out, she said, voice steady but charged with all the emotion of the night. I nodded, holding her gaze. Together. We stood there, the world reduced to the space between us, suspended in a moment of mutual recognition. We had crossed lines, risked exposure, confronted fears, and yet, nothing could undo what had started. Outside, the city carried on, indifferent. Inside, we had discovered something raw, messy, human, and maybe, just maybe, it was enough. The room was quiet again. For now, we didn't need words. Our hands entwined, bodies close but not yet fully merged, hearts beating in tandem. The future was uncertain. The world outside could wait. And in that fragile, suspended space, we understood each other. Truly. Morning came slowly, spilling pale sunlight across the hotel room. The city outside stirred, unaware of the night that had passed within these four walls. A night of stolen glances, whispered confessions, and a tension that neither of us wanted to break. She was still beside me, half leaning against the headboard, hair tousled, eyes soft but alive with something I couldn't name at first. Relief? Joy? Or the quiet thrill of having crossed the lines we'd feared all along? Maybe all of it. I traced a finger along her hand, feeling the warmth, the pulse beneath the skin, and realized I'd never felt more certain about anything in my life. We made it, I said, voice low, not to disrupt the fragile peace. She smiled, the curve of her lips slow and deliberate. We did. Somehow, against everything. Her gaze lingered on mine, unafraid now, free of the hesitations that had haunted us all night. I thought of the chaos, the messages, the knock at the door that could have destroyed everything. None of it mattered anymore. Not the age difference. Not the risks. Not the rules we'd been bending without permission. We'd face them, together, and come out the other side. She leaned closer, resting her forehead against mine. It's terrifying, she admitted, a whisper that somehow felt like a promise. But it feels right. I nodded, unable to speak for the rush of emotions, relief, desire, hope, and the thrill of knowing that this wasn't the end. This was a beginning, messy and human, but ours. We didn't need to say more. The silence was full of meaning, understanding, connection, acceptance. I knew her past, the heartbreaks, the careful boundaries she'd built. And she knew me, my hesitations, my longing, the unspoken ways I had been drawn to her since the moment we met. Somewhere between the quiet city streets below and the warm room around us, we found equilibrium. Not perfection. Not certainty. But honesty. And in that honesty, there was beauty. She shifted, brushing a stray lock of hair from my face, and for the first time, I felt completely seen. Not just noticed, not just desired, but recognized in the way two people can see each other when they've survived a night like this together. "Whatever comes next," I said softly, "we'll handle it. Together." Her eyes sparkled, and I saw a mixture of relief and anticipation. "Together," she echoed, and this time, the word was unshakable. We stayed like that for a while, hands entwined, breasts slowly matching. Outside, life continued with its noise and responsibilities, but inside, we had created a space untouched by judgment, by fear, by past mistakes. A space where love, flawed, human, and real, could thrive. As the sunlight grew warmer, I realized that endings weren't always about closure. They were about understanding, about stepping forward into a future with someone who had become indispensable in the span of a single night. And that was exactly what we were doing. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?